All right, in this module, I want to cover 12 common rookie mistakes that are often made by people new to the business and hopefully help you avoid making these mistakes that a lot of new sellers make. The number one mistake is being afraid to pay your supplier. I know so many people are like, I'm just afraid to send $3,000 or $5,000 or $10,000 to my supplier. And it's okay. I mean, use trade assurance like we talked about in the past. Try to avoid Western Union. If you're or use PayPal, especially for your samples. It's okay. Most of them are not out to get you. You can verify the supplier. You can check the supplier blacklist.com. You can check their ratings. Make sure they're a gold star supplier if they're on Alibaba. There's some things that you can do to actually make sure that everything's okay. A lot of suppliers actually also like to speak. You maybe start corresponding by email, but a lot of them actually prefer to talk by WeChat, which is the biggest app. It's communication app in China. You can download WeChat if you want, or some of them you'll use Skype or WhatsApp. But doing some face-to-face can also give you some assurance. Sometimes they can even give you like a little tour of the factory and like show you, holding up their phone and walk around and show you and give you some comfort. But don't be afraid. As long as you've done your right homework and you've done your due diligence, it's going to be okay. Don't worry about that. Just don't pay them the full balance. Make sure you don't pay them that full balance until that inspection passes. But paying them 20-30% up front. In some cases, they may require 50%, but typically it's 30%. That should be okay. The next thing is a common mistake is neglecting your compliance. We had a module on that earlier by Frederick where he's talking about compliance and what you actually need to do to make sure you're compliant. You gotta make sure you have all the proper certificates. If you got Bluetooth, you have to be Bluetooth certified. If it's a electrical device, it's got to be UL for the US or CE for Europe. Maybe it needs FDA or EPA regulations, whatever it may be. If it's a toy, it has to go through some safety checks, make sure it can't be swallowed. Anything that's got a plastic bag inside, if you get some parts inside a plastic bag, a bunch of screws or something, that bag has to have a suffocation warning on it. It says that, this is not a toy, do not put this around your mouth, those kind of things. Make sure you're in full compliance so that you don't have any issues. And Frederick's module talked in detail more about that. Also, you have to make sure you have anything that's brought into the United States has to say where it was made. So it has to say made in. If it was made in China, it has to say made in China. If it's made in Vietnam, it has to say made in Vietnam. And that goes for both the packaging and the product itself. It has to be on both. And in China, you can't. It has to say made in China. It can't say made in PRC, People's Republic of China. That's not permissible in the U.S. It has to say made in China. Or if it was made in Europe, a lot of times it can't say made in Europe. It has to say made in France or made in Germany. It has to be very, very specific. So make sure everything that you do is in compliance with that. That's cost me a lot of money in the past, where I had the wrong thing for something coming out of Europe. I had the wrong marks on there and I had to pay about $3,000 in penalties. Another thing you want to make sure you do is always use a freight forwarder. Don't try to do this yourself. Now, there's sometimes where you don't need to use a freight forwarder if the value of your shipment is under $2,500 and it's kind of small and lightweight. You could ship that by FedEx or UPS or DHL. In that case, you may not need to use a freight forwarder. You'll just deal with those companies, and if there's any duties or taxes, they'll let you know, and you can just pay them directly. But anything above that, you're going to need a freight forwarder, and there's going to be some fees associated with that, but they're just going to make your life so much easier. Don't try to do it all yourself. You can't run down to the port and pick it up. If you live in Long Beach, you can't I'll just go meet the ship and put it in the back of my pickup truck and take it down to Amazon. It just doesn't work that way. Both the freight forwarder and Amazon, the shipping company and Amazon aren't going to accept you. So there's a process that you have to go through. So make sure you actually go through that proper process. Another thing you want to make sure you don't do is let the supplier know how small you are. You may be a one-man person or one-woman operation working out of your house in the basement. You don't want to let the factory know that. You want to give them the idea that you're a big company. And there's lots of ways you can do that, but the most common way you can actually, they'll know, is if you start asking a lot of questions as if you don't know what you're doing. When they say, would you like this shipped FOB or X-Works? And you're like, what's that? What's the difference in the two? That's a surefire sign that, okay, we're dealing with an amateur here. And they may not want to deal with you, or they may actually charge you more because they know they can get away with it, or they know you're going to be some extra trouble. So make sure you've learned all the terms and you've gone through this module and you understand what you're talking about. when you talk to them. You can also act like you're not a one-man operation. You can actually say, when you're talking to them, say, I'm the purchasing director for XYZ company. And when they come back to you and they say, hey, okay, this is the price, and when you're negotiating, they're like, well, my boss says that I really need to get it to this price. I'm going to have to check with him and get back to you tomorrow, even though you're the boss. But don't make it feel like you're a small company, that can go a long way. Sometimes they'll ask to see your website. Sometimes they'll ask to see your page on Amazon. And if you have that and you're proud of it, it's okay to show them that. If you don't have that, you can say, well, we're just branching into Amazon, just getting started. We've been selling in retail stores or whatever you want to say. But just make sure they don't know that you're small. You're a small one-person operation. Another thing you want to do is make sure that in any communication you have with them, especially when the English is not their native language, that you're very concise and succinct. Don't use slang. I would recommend you actually number your questions. If you have 10 questions for them, don't just write it out in a paragraph. Actually number them. Say, I have a few questions for you. Question number 1, question number 2, question number 3. Because if you just put them all together, they're just going to answer, they're going to cherry pick it and answer just a few of them and not answer every single one. So, and use plain English and be very simple in all your communication. If you have photos or illustrations that you can show them to highlight something, that's going to go a long way versus just describing something. If you're describing a handle on a bag, and you're saying, I want this to be soft and curved at 32 degrees and have this kind of hinge on it. If you have a photo or example from even another product, send that along. That'll really help them understand exactly what you're looking for. And circle the little parts on the photo of exactly what you're talking about. Those kinds of things go a long way, especially for people who aren't native English speakers. Another thing that a lot of people forget to do is negotiate their terms, their payment terms. When you first start out, you're going to probably be at 30% down and 70% when it ships. But over time, you should be able to negotiate that to maybe 20/80 or maybe even 0 and 100, like I talked about earlier. Or in some cases, I know some of my friends who are 0% down and 100% 90 days out. So once you start building a relationship, and if you cultivate that relationship through some of the techniques we've taught you in some of the other modules, you may actually get to that point. Or you can, once you get rocking and rolling, you could do a forecast. And you could say, look, we expect to sell 10,000 units in the next year. Here's our Excel spreadsheet. We would like to grow, but we need your help to grow. Let's grow together. And you can show them exactly what the plan is. And some of these factories will get on board and become your partner and basically become your bank. Now, they're not going to do that day one, but once you prove yourself and you build up that relationship and that guangxi, you'll be surprised at what may happen. Another thing is not understanding cultural differences. It's a big mistake a lot of people make in not understanding the way you have to treat and talk to people of another culture, and just to thinking everybody is the same way you are in your culture. So be respectful of that, and especially when it comes to sourcing from China, you need to know all the holidays, because the holidays there are going to dramatically affect your business. Around Chinese New Year, which is in January, February every year, for 2 to 3 weeks, pretty much everything shuts down. It's going to affect all your production, all your shipping. It's going to create delays. You got to build that in. There's other big festivals like the Dragon Boat Festival is like a 4-day weekend. There's several other ones where it can affect you. And especially like on Chinese New Year, what happens a lot is for those 2 to 3 weeks, the factory workers, they may be working in factory towns, but they go back to their villages or they go back to their hometowns, and a lot of them don't come back. And so when they don't come back, the factories are shorthanded. And so that delays production, or they got to hire new people, and there's more mistakes being made because these are new people on the production line. And so that's when inspections become even more important. So make sure you understand those cultural differences. Another thing that a lot of newbies make a mistake on is they don't tell the supplier how to handle defects. Like we talked about earlier, you want to make sure you put in your purchase agreements that if any inspection that fails, that they're going to fix anything that is found by the inspection company, or any defects that arrive from customers. If you provide photos or you provide a report from Amazon, that they will either credit you or refund you for those on a future order. Those are important things to do. It's actually illegal to send defective products back to China. So you can't really box them up and send them back to them and say replace them. It's actually illegal under Chinese law to do that. But you want to make sure you have these things for what happens if there's a defect in place. Another thing is the mistake a lot of people make is trusting a single factory. You always want to have a backup factory, because there's times where your factory may not be able to keep up with you if you're growing fast. There's times where your factory maybe is starting to drop the ball and you need to switch to another factory, or sometimes it's best to produce at 2 different factories. And those don't have to be in the same country. Sometimes you can avoid a lot of the tariffs and duties by maybe starting the manufacture in China and then switching that to Taiwan or switching it to India or Vietnam or somewhere. So you always need to have a backup factory, and just in case something goes wrong or some new tariff or Trump tax or something comes in that can adversely affect your business. Another thing a lot of people do when they're first starting out is they think that the packaging, they need to get heavily involved in their product and their packaging. And packaging, like we talked about, is super important. But unless you're ordering 10 or 50 or 100,000 units, don't worry about going and finding a packaging factory. I mean, maybe if your packaging is super special and super complicated, you may need to do that. But a lot of times the factories have relationships with local people that can do the packaging for you. So tell them kind of what you want and let them kind of handle that on your smaller orders. Don't try to micromanage it and do everything yourself, especially on an order of 500 or 1,000. Let the factory partner with who they partner with and have the supply chain with on the packaging, unless it's just super complicated. I know a lot of people are like, well, I got to find a packaging factory. I got to find the manufacturer. A lot of times, just let the manufacturer handle that when you're first starting out. And later on, you may want to break that apart. But when you're first starting out, it's best to let them do it together. Another big mistake is not doing inspections. In the last module, we showed you an inspection report. Not doing inspections and not doing them every single time for every single factory. Always do those inspections. It's just going to prevent so many problems, and it's going to protect your brand and help your business longevity. Another thing that people get hung up is on the pricing when they're sourcing. They get hung up like, well, I really need this for 25 cents less. And sometimes you really do need it for 25 cents less to make the right margin. But sometimes it's just not worth it because the quality is going to suffer or the lead times are going to suffer. It's better to have, sometimes it's better to actually pay more and have a better quality product and have a better customer experience down the road than to just be constantly negotiating and just playing hardball on pricing. Reach a point that's workable for you and then go with it. And later on, if you really need to shave something off, shave it off. But just get up and running and make sure that they're not going to cut corners and the product quality is going to suffer as a result. So these are 12 common mistakes that rookies make, and hopefully now that you know what they are, you can avoid most, if not all of them. I hope this has been helpful, and look forward to seeing you again in the next module.